I've already clicked it.
We're live.
Everybody. Thanks for showing up today and for joining us here. As we talk about small stories with big impact, we're talking about short stories. And just going to give everybody a few seconds to pop in. The chat is already lively as we expect. Welcome B, welcome NJ, welcome Athena. Who else do we have here? NJ,
Sarah there.
Sarah, yeah.
Sarah. Yeah, Sarah. Good to see you. Thanks all for joining us. JM Brown, hello again.
I want to highlight Athena's comment here. I've been in book mode so long, but my thing is I get too attached to my characters. Short stories don't stay short because they all deserve their own book. This is the perspective I'm bringing into this challenge. I'm trying hard not to. I'm trying hard to say, okay, these characters will only exist in this 8,000 word span.
Yeah. Well, and that's okay. You know, the thing about short stories is, and this is one of the slides we're going to get to, the short story is a window into a world. It doesn't mean that the rest of the world doesn't exist or can't expand to other stories and in other ways. This is just the window that we're seeing this world through. So if you keep that perspective, these characters that you develop can go on to live other lives and can, that you could, if you have more stories to tell of them, then do that. But all of the things that you imagine don't have to exist in this one window. So if you kind of keep that perspective, for me, that's how I kind of try to keep things in perspective. Hello, Robert.
Also,
welcome in. Janet.
I'm killing
Jane,
all the
Ginger.
characters in my short stories. So
Stacy's here. Wait, you're killing, like, as in, like, you're killing it? Like, yeah, or like I'm I'm killing it.
They're gone. They don't make it.
Oh, ouch.
Yeah.
Well, who ends the story? I guess the narrator.
Okay, so how much do I want to spoil it? The way I have it now, and subject to change because Hank's gonna put us through a different planning style than I've known before. It ends with the main character or protagonist not dead but trapped.
Okay.
Trapped forever, and not in a good place. So
okay.
Let's start with because listening to you guys talk over the last several weeks and getting some input from folks in our chat on our YouTube channel, maybe some folks over in the Storycraft Cafe. Short stories are intimidating to a lot of people for different reasons. Let's start. I'll ask Doug and Abby, and if anyone wants to comment in the chat, please do. What is your main concern with writing short stories? What is it? I don't want to use the word intimidates, even though that is a valid feeling. But what is it that scares you away from short stories?
For me, it's because I think intimidate is the right word, actually.
Okay.
Because I can be concise with my language. I have that capability,
Sure.
especially with an editing background. I know how to remove words, but I like the freedom that a big story lets me have in exploring characters and exploring subplots. The idea of not having like 4 subplots, this seems weird to me. So like this book that I just finished in January, 160,000 words long, right? And even then I probably could have added more. I had to restrain myself and be like, this is saved for the next book. So like I like having a lot going on, but that's also just a byproduct of the genre that I write.
True. And there are lots of great fantasy short story collections. And as a matter of fact, I have a couple on my bookshelf. I'll post some good fantasy short story collections that I've enjoyed. 2, I think I have 4 on my shelf, and 2 or 3 have been edited by George R.R. Martin, someone who is not afraid to write lots and lots of words. Yeah. So interesting. So anyway, I'll post that for anyone that might want to look at how other folks do it. What about you, Abby?
I think for me, it's the idea of the arc. So like I had to work really hard to figure out how to write a character arc in the first place. And I sort of resisted it in a way for many years because I tend to like characters who are a little, I don't want to say flat, but who circle back around and stubbornly end up in the same place after they've been through the ringer. Like, I just find that to be delightful and stubborn. And I'm like, well, I'm just trying to figure out, like, how much of a character arc do you have to deliver? Do you have to deliver one? And how do you add that, like, twist? I mean, I don't know. So that's kind of where I'm stuck with it. And
I think a short story is a great vehicle for a flat character arc. And just because a character has a flat arc doesn't mean big things don't happen to them or big emotions don't happen to them. It's how they respond to that big event that determines their character arc. So they, that it's up to them to grow or not, or to, whatever the opposite of grow is, to resist it. But let's dig into some slides here for a minute. Small stories, big impact. The art of short story. Week 1, finding your story. A little bit about me. I published my first book in 2013. I've written 9 novels. I've written and published 16 short stories. I think there might be 1 or 2 others there, but I couldn't confirm. Some have been indie published. Most have been published in anthologies and literary journals, as well as a collected volume of short fiction that I published. 3 of my short stories now reside on the moon as part of the Lunar Codex project. So there's that, for whatever that's worth, for when the little green men.
That's worth a lot, Hank.
Well, I mean, I didn't, send it to the moon. It was, but they do reside there now. I was part of a project that did that. Anyway, I digress. Why short stories? And I'm going to pull this up on I apologize that some of these slides are going to be tough to read, but trust me. The reason short stories are a valuable tool for your writer toolbox, I just kind of thought of several different reasons. Discipline and economy. Short stories force writers to make every word count. The constraint of limited space demands precision in language, character development, and plotting. So, and this is one of those cases where I have a tendency to kind of be verbose and to overtalk sometimes. But writing the short story forces me to dial that back and make sure that what I have to say is what needs to be said. And people don't have to fish around in all of my words to find out what I really mean. Say what you mean. It kind of forces you to get down to the gist of what's going on. Structural completeness. A short story requires a beginning, middle, and end in compressed form. Mastering this teaches authors how to create satisfying narrative arcs efficiently. There's also something that goes along with this. The sticking the landing on a beginning, middle, and end builds confidence. And there's nothing like starting a story and getting to the end of it and typing the end. Nothing can build your writer confidence better than actually completing something. And a short story, lets you kind of go through that whole arc of storytelling, get to the end, and have an accomplishment that you can show, even if it's just to yourself, or even, it's a completed story. And then you can start dissecting if you did it well, what things you can learn from that, where you need to work on your, prose, whatever. But you get to the end, and that's more than so many other people. I've said it so many times before. If you were to poll a room of 100 people and ask them how many people in here feel like you have a story in you, I think 98 out of that 100 people would raise their hand. And then you say, well, how many of you have you actually started writing a story, and you probably get half the room. And then when you go down the line and say, how many have you completed a story, wrote a complete narrative arc, beginning, middle, and end, and you might, if it's a lucky room, you might get 2 people, might. But writing a short story will get you through the process, and that's confidence that you can get from doing nothing other than effectively pursuing that. Abby, I feel like you want to say something. No? Okay.
No, I'm just agreeing with you. I'm being an active listener so that you know.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Short stories also let you experiment with less risk. Short stories provide a laboratory for trying new voices, perspectives, genres, and techniques without committing months or years to a novel-length experiment. We've talked about how, as a matter of fact, I posted something in the cafe the other day and was talking about how the limits of time can actually be your friend. So many people, when they're writing their first novel, it takes 5 or 10 years sometimes. Then the second novel, 3 to 5, and then the third novel. I think you even commented something like this, Abby, that each time gets better and better and better. And if you're not sure about what you want to write, or you've got some things that aren't exactly nailed down, this gives you the room to experiment and to try things without committing. Robert, you're saying constraints breed creativity? 100%. Yes, absolutely. So it allows you to experiment without committing too much time. Immediate completion, finishing projects builds confidence and momentum, what we talked about earlier. Diversification of ideas. Authors can explore multiple concepts, characters, and worlds rather than investing years. Kind of more of what we were talking about. Finding your voice. This is important. Through multiple short pieces, writers can discover their authentic voice and thematic concerns more efficiently than through fewer long form works. As you go through this process of completing a story, having a beginning, middle, and end, having character arcs, and having characters that grow or don't grow, but then you understand why they don't grow, you start to see your voice popping through, what makes you as a writer, and going through this process helps you develop that. Publishing opportunities. Literary magazines, anthologies, online platforms offer numerous venues for short fiction, providing publication credits that can help you establish a writing career, especially if you are trying to break into traditional publishing. Those credits definitely help. Also, there are numerous opportunities for indie publishing and for anthologies put out by small presses or indie presses. There's all sorts of easier ways to slip into publishing. Let's see. Building an audience. Publish short stories can help authors find readers before releasing longer works. Skill transferability. This is important. The techniques mastered in short fiction, characterization, dialogue, scene building, endings, directly transfer to novel writing, screenwriting, and other forms. What you learn from writing short stories carries over to writing novels. Testing grounds for longer works. This kind of goes back to what we talked about, the experimentation. As Raymond Carver noted, that's all we have, finally, the words, and they had better be the right ones, with the punctuation in the right places, so that they can best say what they're meant to say. Short stories teach this precision better than perhaps any other form. They help you to get to the point, say what you want to say.
I can't make any promises about punctuation.
Well, that's not my
that's why I'm here.
That's for Doug to lose sleep over. Here's a couple of famous writers who had some things to say about short story writing that I appreciated. Ray Bradbury developed what he called his quantum theory, and his theory was to write one short story per week for a year. And he said it's not possible to write 52 bad short stories in a row, believing that quantity inevitably leads to quality through practice. And we joke about what Ray Bradbury has said about that numerous times. Joyce Carol Oates advocates for writing first drafts quickly and intensely, what she calls writing from white heat to capture the raw emotional core of a story before revising more methodically. She believes this preserves the story's visceral power. While Oates often writes initial drafts quickly, she views revision as a process of discovery rather than mere correction. She might revise a story dozens of times, each time digging deeper into its meaning. And we're going to talk about that some in a little bit. And then finally, Stephen King. For King, many short stories begin with a simple what-if question. This approach has spawned many of his short works, from The Mist, what if a mysterious fog contained monsters? Or to Survivor Type, the what if was, what if a surgeon was stranded on a deserted island with nothing to eat? King believes short stories demand a sense of urgency that novels don't always require. He advocates for compressing time frames and limiting characters to maintain intensity in the short form. He places special importance on short story endings and believes they should provide both closure and openness, resolving the immediate situation while suggesting larger implications. And that's one thing that short stories are very adept at doing is the conveying the emotional resonance. And Dean Wesley Smith, in a show that we did just a couple weeks ago, he said that for him, short stories are just just like a novel, except they only contain one try-fail cycle. And while that's technically true in most cases, I think for me, and this is nothing against Dean Wesley Smith, who has hundreds of writing credits to his name and has a 50-year career. I am not here to correct Dean Wesley Smith, so please don't hear me say that. But for me, it's more about the emotional resonance, the emotional moment at the end of the story, than it is about just a shortened try-fail cycle. The short story is not required to answer all the questions as long as it gives an emotional payoff. That's what people get wrong sometimes about the short story, is it's more about how the reader is left feeling at the end than having all of the loose ends tied up. In a novel, we want a clean ending, unless it's in a series and there's more of this story to come. Most of the time, a standalone novel, we want things tied up. We don't want loose ends. We want the writer to do his or her job. In a short story, it's not like that. I talked on one of our shows a while back about this short story called The Ride, and it was later made into a short film. I think you can find it on YouTube. And it's by a guy named Dallas Jenkins made the short film, but it was based on a short story written by his dad. And it's a retelling of the biblical story of the prodigal son, where, a son asks for his inheritance early. He goes off, he wastes all the money. And then he finds himself, after all of his friends have abandoned him and he's spent through all of his money and he's living with a herd of pigs, he decides to go home, and the father takes him back, and they throw a big banquet, and the father welcomes home the prodigal son. Is kind of the gist of it. Well, in this retelling, there's a young man who gets into a cab on Christmas Eve night, and he gives the cab driver his address, and through conversation between these two people, he finds out that the young man in the back seat is going to commit suicide because he has wasted his life. He's lost his job. He's hopeless, and he's distanced from his family, and they'll never take him back. And through the conversation that these two people have, the driver convinces him to at least give his parents a call and see if they would be willing to see him over Christmas. Where the where the emotional resonance comes from is that there's he calls his father and gets an answering machine, and he leaves a message, and he says, "I'm going to drive by. If you'd like to see me, just leave the porch light on. So, and if I don't see the porch light, I'll just know to keep driving, and no hard feelings." Well, when the cab turns the corner to the father's house, every light in the house is on, not just the porch light, all of the lights. And then there are lamps all on the front lawn, and there are extension cords running, and every, the whole thing is lit up. So he just asked, "Leave a light on for me." And the father went over and above to show that he wanted to see the son, and welcomed him home. And then it ends like that. You don't need to see their reconciliation. You don't need to see everything that comes after that. That emotion lands so hard at the end that you know how it's going to end. You don't need anything else. And that's what a short story can do, is we don't have to have all of the fallout from that. We don't need to see how their relationship is healed or whatever. We get the point. And that's what a short story.
I'm choked up just listening to you recall the story.
Yeah.
Imagine had I actually read it.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible. It's echoes of the tie yellow ribbon from the 70s. Yeah, absolutely.
And also, if I remember correctly, we spoke about how the same short story can be drastically changed by like the last line. Whereas in this one, there's so many lights out there, but we brainstormed, okay, what if they drove away and then the lights came on? Or what if they drove away and then the driver saw the lights come on in the rearview mirror, but kept driving? Like,
that last sentence could drastically change everything, and depends on that emotional resonance that you're shooting for.
Should I put this question here?
Yes, I was actually I had my mouse over it to pop it up. Yeah. So do you start with a desired emotion in mind? Yes. I always do. And that's one of the slides I have coming up in a minute. But yes, to answer your question, yes, we're going to talk about that in just a minute. Next up, a short story is to a novel as a memoir is to a biography. And we touched on this just a minute ago. If you think of a biography as kind of a cradle to grave story, this is the whole story of a person's life. But a memoir is usually a window into a time period or an event, or there's some narrative thread to it. And it's not the entire life, but it's an experience usually. And, it can cover several years or whatever, but there's a narrative thread that ties that together. A short story is, if you think about it, it's the same kind of thing. It's a window into, like we were just talking about the ride. You don't need to know everything that happens after that. We just need to know this happened, and this was the emotional response to that. Let's see what's next. A few other folks. A novel can take a more meandering path, but should still have a clearly defined beginning, middle, and end. A short story is about a single moment, a single event. That was Edwidge Danticat. The short story is an apocalypse in a teacup. Nadine Gordimer says, I love that. An apocalypse in a teacup. Joyce Carey said, Joyce Carey said, well, the novel, which takes perhaps years to write, the author is not the same man he was at the end of the book as he was at the beginning. It's not only that his characters have developed, he has developed with them. Kurt Vonnegut said, the art of the short story is knowing what to leave out. And so much truth to that. And then Neil Gaiman, who is, well, we'll just leave Neil Gaiman out of that. But he said short stories are tiny windows into other worlds and other minds and dreams. They're journeys you can make to the far side of the universe and still be back in time for dinner. I love that. So I think, have I convinced everybody that the short story is at least something worth trying your hand at?
You convinced me.
Okay. All right. So short story ideas, if you start thinking about your story, what are some ways to brainstorm story ideas? And I know you guys have already gotten started at this, so, but everybody else might want to. Our most compelling material often comes from your own lives, though usually transformed. Let's mine our experiences for story potential. So if you have a personal experience, like you missed a flight or you're late for an important interview, the what if transformation might be, what if a character misses a flight and meets someone who changes their life's direction? The further what if might be, what if they discover later the missed flight crashed? So, there are things that we experience every day that if you start playing the what if game, it's like we've talked about before, that the story ideas are not the problem. Great ideas. It's, what can you do with them? And by playing the what if game, you can take any mundane occurrence and find a story in it. At the heart of every compelling story is a character who wants something badly and is having trouble getting it. This simple formula drives nearly all fiction. What does your character want? What's the obstacle? Who or what stands in their way? What internal quality complicates their pursuit? And what do they actually need? And which is often different from what they want. Figuring out usually or sometimes when a character says they want something, they really don't. And a lot of times you can spend a whole novel exploring what the difference in their needs and wants are. And, that's what so many great stories are built on. B, you really couldn't expect a group of writers not to have already half written the story. No, I didn't expect that at all.
And we had more warning than all of you.
I know.
We knew this was coming.
Yeah, we've literally been talking about this for months. We've been talking about it since last year. Yeah, NJ, what if how my writing started? Yeah, that's literally where the best story ideas come from. Yeah. We talked. We mentioned a few minutes ago in the writing sprints that we were going to talk about a new type of planning. So if we come up with a character, we decide that they want something, we play the what if game, and we put them in some sort of trouble or keep what they want from them. Then how do we start kind of thinking about that? I like to call this tent pole planning, and I didn't make up that term. I've heard people use it all over the place, but I like to think of short story planning in kind of five stages. The exposition, how we establish character, setting, and situation. An inciting incident, something disrupts the status quo. Rising action and complications, character pursues the goal, faces obstacles. Crisis and climax, character faces a moment of truth or decision. And then resolution, we show the aftermath and the character change. You can start with these 5 10 poles to your story. And if you're using the Dabble plot grid, I would start a plot grid with just these 5 entries and then start kind of breaking them out a little bit as you go. Joyce Carol Oates, we referenced earlier, talks about kind of writing in the white hot passion of the story and writing it quickly. If you can establish these 5 tent poles, you can rush through your first draft of the story, making sure that you hit all of these. And it doesn't have to be fully fleshed out. We actually would like for it not to be fully fleshed out, but you can start seeing the form of the beginning, middle, and end by addressing these 5 tent poles and writing through them. And this is where my favorite writing method. The onion method comes in. Edgar Allan Poe said the ideal short story can be read in one sitting. If you read in one sitting, it doesn't break the spell. If you can write the first draft in one sitting, that's amazing. If you could do that, I have done that a couple of times, not always. But if you can, even if your story will be 7,000 words, if you can write your story beginning, middle, and end in 1,000 words, in 1,500 words, in one setting, and then go back to the top and write through the story again, and add layers, you've already established the structure of your story by kind of writing through those 5 tent poles. And then you can go back and through the process of revision and adding detail and add layers to your story. You're constantly reading through that story. There are no surprises coming to you as a writer because you know where the story's going. But you can see the end from the beginning close enough to know where things need to be added, where things need to be fleshed out. And this really kind of flies in the face of writing with an outline, or, like we approach novel writing where, they're big set pieces and we're writing around them. But the short story, you can see the beginning from the end and see where things need to be fleshed out. Let's see.
Are you looking for questions or?
Yeah. Have you guys ever tried the onion method of writing, of layering your stories?
I have. As a matter of fact, that's how I wrote my last book. It was 44,000 MG word MG low fantasy in the end. Yeah. But I started off by writing a 7-page, we'll say short story, but it really wasn't a short story. It was just 7 pages that had all the bits and pieces that I wanted in it. And in the end, each paragraph pretty much directly related to a chapter in the book. So I would take that paragraph from my 7-page draft, and then I would translate it into 4 or 5 pages that were the equivalent of the chapter for the story. And I actually thought it was a beautiful way to get all the parts and pieces in there. Nobody had to understand that draft except for me. So it wasn't like it was something I was going to share with everyone, because it wouldn't have made Randall's got my joke. That's what I was saying.
Yeah. But Alicia said, sounds like the snowflake method. Yes. In a lot of ways, it is. And I was actually using this onioning method, and it's a method that I stole from my friend Steve Bowyer. Before I read Randy Ingermanson's snowflake method, and he's been on our podcast talking about the snowflake method one day last year. But yeah, as I started getting into that, I started realizing people have all different kinds of names for things, but I think we've all kind of figured out different ways of doing the same things a lot of times. I think it was Robert earlier that asked about having that emotional response in mind from the beginning. And we want to talk a minute about thinking about the ending from the beginning. Earned emotion, the ending's emotional punch must be prepared for throughout the story, but not telegraphed. Flannery O'Connor's violent endings work because they're simultaneously shocking and inevitable. Precision of language. In the final moments, each word must be perfectly chosen. Consider the devastating simplicity of Hemingway's 6-word story. For sale, baby shoes, never worn. I think that kind of speaks for itself. Rhythm and cadence. The musicality of the final sentences often carry emotional weight. The long flowing final sentence of The Dead creates a lulling effect that enhances its emotional power. Space for the reader. Effective endings often leave room for readers to complete the emotional experience themselves. They suggest, rather than state, the final emotional truth. And this goes back to the ride we were talking about earlier, that you don't have to tell it all if you deliver the right emotion at the end. The reader will fill in those blanks for you and do the work for you. Return to the beginning. Endings that subtly echo or transform elements from the story's opening create emotional symmetry. Tobias Wolff's Bullet in the Brain refers to the protagonist's love of language in its final moments. This, to go back to what Abby said earlier about the character arc. This is a great way to show that a character arc or lack of a character arc, because sometimes your emotional payoff at the end is the realization for the reader that the character didn't learn anything, that they didn't change, when you could see all along all of the clues and all of the reasons for them to change. When they don't change, that's kind of an emotional gut punch for the reader, because you can see they should and they just don't, and sometimes that's more than than you could telegraph through in many other ways. Surprise without trickery. The most powerful endings often surprise readers, yet feel completely right once revealed. They don't rely on gimmicks, but on deeper emotional truths. You should try for surprise endings, but not at the expense of your reader's sanity. Transformation.
Tell me how to write, Hank.
Yeah, well, no, take that with a grain of whatever. But, transformation versus resolution. The most affecting endings don't simply resolve plots, but show how characters have been transformed. Even if external circumstances remain unchanged, something essential has shifted internally. Or didn't. I keep going back to what you said, Abby, about flat character arcs, but I just keep thinking about that. Sometimes the biggest emotional payoff at the end is when a character doesn't change, and they've had every reason to change, and they just won't.
So, like, spoiler for this one, I want to write a character who learns the lesson one beat too late. And that's what I've decided to do. So, yeah.
Be still my heart. I love it. I love it. Doug, what do you think about surprise endings and twist at the end?
I appreciate them as a reader sometimes.
Yeah.
As a writer, I sometimes struggle with certain surprises. I am very much under the pretense, the thought and school of thought that if you give me a big twist at the end, a big surprise, then I should be able to go back, reread the book, and figure it out, knowing how it ends, like the little breadcrumbs that got me there. If I can't find those breadcrumbs on a reread, then I think something has gone wrong in that story, because then that twist doesn't feel satisfying. It just feels like it's a 90-degree turn for the sake of a 90-degree turn.
Yeah. You definitely don't want the cheap ending. And we're going to talk about that in a minute. But before we talk about any more about endings, I think we need to talk about beginnings for just a minute. And we're going to skip over the slide about first person versus third person. We can dig into that later.
Do you put it in the wrong order, Hank?
I've done that. I did that in our most recent workshop.
Well, I just don't think it's as important right now. First person, third person, whatever. Try both ways. But let's compare the beginning of a short story and a novel. In a short story, you need to beware of the economy of character introduction. So in a short story, you must introduce only essential characters, often through implication rather than description. In a novel, you can gradually unfold character details across chapters, introduce characters sequentially. A friend and I read through a bunch of Tom Clancy novels back in the 90s, and we were just trading novels back and forth that I had collected, some he had collected, and it was a thing we did. Anyway, we had this kind of running joke that 200 pages into a Tom Clancy novel, he was still introducing characters, and by the time at the end of it, you had 400 characters, and they're just constantly coming in. Well, you can't do that in a short story. You have to have a handful. 3 usually is ideal, 3 or less, and sometimes, as we said, often you introduce them through implication and not through whole backstory. You bring them in with some action, or with you have another reason. You have to have a reason to bring them in, and not just unfolding it willy-nilly. Setting yes, go ahead.
Sorry, can I focus on 2 words here?
Yes.
First being economy, and it's something that you mentioned on the first slide as well, which is something that I'm really looking forward to as someone who is verbose and who writes longer novels. The idea of like word economy, or the economy of character introduction, is really cool, and I think what I'm most going to take away from these 4 weeks when we're spending time with this story. But then dialing in further on this implication rather than description, that is like the essence of show don't tell.
Yes.
Which, as much as people might not like rules when it comes to writing, but like that is a rule that you should follow more often than not, because it objectively makes stronger writing in many situations. And this is a prime example of how that can be. Coming into this challenge, I had 5 characters ready for this story, Hank, and you said come thinking about 3 characters. I'm like, oh, okay. And then I completely changed how I want to start the story just based on that. So because you don't have time to describe these guys, right? Or these people.
So because I've already written the first couple pages.
She's worse than me.
I have also 5 characters, but I introduce them hoping that the reader already knows people like them, therefore not necessitating for me to have to harp on anything, except like I'm really hoping that somebody who reads the story is like, I know someone just like that, and then boom, that's all I have to give them.
Yeah. Another thing that I've done is, if I had 5 or 6 characters, and I thought they were important for different reasons, I would find ways to combine characters, to take the attributes of 2 characters and make 1 character out of it. And what I found is that sometimes it makes a more interesting character, because they sometimes they're kind of at war with themselves, and that brings out more character drama. So, and just because we say stay with 3 characters, that doesn't mean there can't be more characters in your story.
Okay, good.
It should be focus characters that you can have people that your characters interact with, but they shouldn't be the focus of the story.
Okay.
So that's kind of what I mean.
I also, correct me if I'm wrong, Hank, but I feel like we're gonna, like, archetypes and tropes are gonna be our friends.
Yes. Yes.
Because like you said, Abby, that relatability, that's where they come in.
It's a mean girl. I wrote a mean girl into my story.
And the one thing that you're gonna learn is that you need to rely on what the reader brings to the story as well. And if there are archetypes that we're all familiar with, that are part of the stories we've heard all of our lives, if we can plug into that, and we can allow the reader to bring that to the story instead of us provide that to the reader, then they have helped us tell the story.
Yeah, excellent.
All right, number 2, setting establishment. In a short story, the setting details must do double duty: establish place while revealing character or advancing plot. In a novel, we can dedicate entire passages to world building, atmosphere. Robert Jordan in The Wheel of Time, spent 3 pages one time describing the buttons on somebody's jacket. You can't do that in a short story. You gotta You got to get to the point.
Get in, get out.
Yeah. Shiny buttons. That'll do. That'll do.
Shiny buttons.
We don't need to hear, the backstory of the tailor who had an artisan that, worked on these buttons through skill handed down through their family through generations. That doesn't matter. They were shiny buttons. They caught the glint of the morning sun. Whatever.
How do you know what my story's about, Hank?
Doug, you are an archetype of
the Doug,
the verbose writer. Yeah. Randall said you shouldn't do that in a novel either. Touche, Randall. Touche. Yeah.
Tell that to Robert Jordan.
Yeah. Well.
Tell that to Doug.
Yeah. Anyway, when you see him in the next life, pass a note to him. Yeah. Conflict introduction. Short story often hints at the central tension in the opening paragraph. Whereas in a novel, you may slowly build to the core conflict over several chapters. This is, some people will say that in a short story, you should begin as close to the action or as close to the inciting incident as possible. And this is one way to do that. Introduce your conflict early on, put your character in the thick of it. And then, you can introduce your character. You can bring out several character traits in the midst of that conflict. And you'll learn pretty quickly that you can do double and triple duty with characters that will help you in your novel writing later. All of this economy that you're picking up in short story will make you a better novelist by unlocking abilities to communicate more effectively with your reader instead of just relying on crutch chapters.
Can I touch on what Jane just said in the chat there?
Yep,
So that
yep.
like a little moment of Doug talk here. Archetypes and tropes they have this bad reputation because people think that they are the same as cliches. Cliches, bad, overdone to death. No one likes them anymore. They lack impact. Archetypes and tropes are different and are actually like some of your best friends when it comes to writing. So archetypes are a set of character traits and personality types, behaviors, motivations, that sort of stuff, that if you want like a very academic definition that I've used a couple of times, they transcend geographical and time and societal boundaries, so that someone can recognize, like someone reading here in North America and someone reading in South Africa, they can identify the same kind of character because they instantly recognize these traits, like a leader or an outlaw or a sage, a magician, those kinds of things. We have articles about it. I'll get the link after.
Yeah.
Tropes are more genre specific. Sorry, Hank, go ahead.
No. I was just going to say they're the building blocks of the story that we're telling.
Yes. So, and tropes are more genre specific. So not characters, but like in romance, one bed or enemies to lovers or love triangle. These are all things that people immediately recognize and in a lot of cases love. But like Hank said, they're places where you start building from. So you take an archetype and then you make it your own, but you still have those core principles in there that when someone reads like 2 lines about this character, they immediately know like 10 things about them. And that goes back to the economy that I'm really excited about here.
Yeah. And then if you want to subvert the tropes and to do something unexpected with those tropes, you need to understand the tropes to begin with, so you know how to subvert them. This goes back to some conversations that have been going on in the Storycraft Cafe about the rules of writing, and you kind of need to know the rules before you kind of know where the boundaries are and what you can push on and what you should stay away from. So anyway,
and if you're going to write romance, you absolutely need to know tropes, because romance readers will only read the tropes that they love.
Yes.
I love a
for the most part.
Fake dating. That's like, if I know it's fake dating, I'm going to pick it up immediately.
Yeah.
Enemies to lovers is my gem. It's just so much fun, especially in like Hallmark Christmas movies, where big city lawyer goes to small hometown and immediately is antagonistic with ranch boy or something. I don't like.
I'm really enjoying this idea of Doug like curled up with the snow outside, watching a Hallmark
love
movie.
holiday season with all the Hallmark movies. Oh,
with his
they're my
fuzzy
favorite.
slippers. Don't forget the
His
fuzzy slippers.
slippers, the dog right there.
I have slippers. Oh, they aren't even packed away. They're over there. They have bells on them. They're like little elf slippers with bells on the end.
And
can't wear them around many dogs.
And he's sipping cocoa because he doesn't want to have coffee after dark because it's going to keep him up all night.
Love it.
Yeah,
that was personal, Hank. That was targeted.
I'm not saying we have a backstory worked out, Doug. I'm just saying that
Randall Ranch Boy is a great name for a character in an alternate universe.
Randall's cracking me up in the chat today, by the way. I almost busted out with that dad joke that he laid down. What about last person?
All right. Sorry, Hank. Go on.
Oh, narrative promise. In a short story, the opening must suggest the emotional territory of the entire piece. In a novel, we can begin with smaller promise that expands as the narrative develops. So just, short stories teach you to get to the point and to set the tone quickly for what you're going to deliver. Let's see. The opening. In a short story, you don't have the luxury of 50 pages to set the scene. Your opening paragraph, sometimes your opening sentence, must do multiple jobs simultaneously. Introduce your character, introduce your setting, hint at conflict, set the tone. James Joyce's Araby, North Richmond Street, being blind, was a quiet street except at the hour when the Christian Brothers School set the boys free. In that opening sentence, you immediately establish the place, suggest the confinement. In Flannery O'Connor's A Good Man is Hard to Find, the grandmother didn't want to go to Florida. Is the opening sentence. Simple statement that immediately establishes the character and conflict. You've got grandma, she doesn't want to go. No, what happens from there? Make your opening, make a statement. If get to the point, introduce someone, give the reader a question like, who is this? What are they up to? Why does grandma not want to go to Florida? And then you're off to the races. You've gotten the reader into the thick of it. We talked about twists earlier, and so many short stories rely on a twist ending. There's more to it than you expect. So what makes an effective twist ending? It's surprising yet inevitable. The best twist endings feel surprising when revealed, but inevitable in retrospect. What Doug talked about earlier, that when you reread, you want to know that you could have guessed the twist, you just didn't. But I had everything I needed to, but you fooled me. That's the best kind. They shouldn't come completely out of nowhere, as in the aliens did it problem. All the clues should be present in the story, even if subtly placed. That's even better if in retrospect, as the reader, you say, God, I should have known it. I should have seen it. I just didn't. In Shirley Jackson's The Lottery, the casual gathering of stones in the opening paragraph becomes horrifically significant at the end. There should be a transformation of meaning. Effective twists don't just change the plot, they transform the story's meaning. They reveal something essential about character, theme, or the human condition. In O. Henry's The Gift of the Magi, uses its twist to deepen the theme of sacrifice, not merely to surprise. And for homework this week, I want everyone to read The Lottery and The Gift of the Magi. And I think I saw Randall say something about O. Henry earlier, that these are both stories I think we're all familiar with, but they do things in a very powerful way. Earning the twist. Twist must be prepared for throughout the story without being telegraphed. This requires careful management of information, what to reveal, what to withhold, and when. Misdirection should be organic, not manipulative. A good example is Roald Dahl's Lamb to the Slaughter. He prevents clues in plain sight while directing attention elsewhere. Again, the best kind, or at the end, when you reread and you see, oh, the clues were all there in front of me, I just didn't put it together. Robert says the sass never sleeps. What do we?
Because I said he was too sick to join us on stream, but apparently not sick enough to not be sassy. Jane asked a question here for this point. What does telegraphed mean in this context? Meaning twist must be prepared for throughout the story without being.
I also had that same question. Thank you, Jane.
Yeah. You don't want to be overt with your clues. You don't want a clue with a wink. You know, you want things to be subtly, thank you, hinted at, while covered up with other misdirection.
Do you think
Yes.
sometimes our writers' brains make us look for those clues when maybe a normal reader would gloss over them? Because as I read these short stories, especially after, because I read like part of Roald Dahl's whole book of short stories, and you start to see a pattern.
Yeah.
And so sometimes I think reading a short story in isolation and turning your frickin' writer's brain off while you're doing it is part of the key, because when you see the clue, I mean, you know what they're doing. And so you're looking for it. And it's hard as a writer sometimes to be a reader. So I'm just going to throw that out there.
That's why beta readers are so important, right?
Beta readers who are not writers.
Who are
not writers. Yeah, and we've talked about that before. Writers are not your typical audience, and yeah, that's unfair to writers that we can never read stuff and be entertained. But you know, that's just part of it.
It's the gig.
I'm being an editor too. Right. Ever since I started editing, and I can't turn that part of my brain off. And even if there's no error, I'll be like, "Oh, I wouldn't have written it that way."
I know,
but.
Yeah, and I would think that is a detriment to being an editor. That you know, how do you turn off the side of your brain that says, "Oh, I would have done it this way"?
You're always in suggesting mode.
Yeah, you never experience joy again. So
no. Except with Hallmark movies.
Arguably the most formulaic movies on the screen. I think this, what you said, Abby, comes down to so many stories are recognizable in their beats. Like we all know the beats, or the tent poles for these short stories, or like, and when you really know your genre, you know where red herrings should fall and where clues should fall, just based on where you are in the story. So it's tough. It's tough once you know all of that. But it is also sometimes, I think sometimes it goes the other way too, where when you're writing a story, you think that the reader will clue into more than they're actually cluing into, because you're spending an hour writing your chapter, but they're breezing through it in 7 minutes.
Yeah.
Right. We've got a couple more slides to get through. Common types of twist endings. The revelation twist. A key piece of information is revealed that changes everything. Often involves identity, relationship, or motivation being different than assumed. Example, Flannery O'Connor's Good Country People, where the seemingly naive Bible salesman is revealed to be a nihilistic con man. The perspective shift. The reader suddenly sees events from a different angle or perspective, can involve unreliable narration being exposed. One example is Charlotte Perkins Gilman's The Yellow Wallpaper, where the narrator's perspective shifts from seemingly rational to deeply disturbed. The contextual twist. The context or setting is revealed to be different than assumed, often used in science fiction and speculative fiction. An example is Ambrose Bierce's An Occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge, where an apparent escape is revealed to be a dying man's fantasy. You have to be careful with these. There's lots of things that can go wrong in this type of twist ending. But number 4, the character reversal. Characters act in ways contrary to how they've been presented, reveals hidden aspects of personality or motivation. An example is Raymond Carver's Popular Mechanics, where a custody dispute takes a dark turn. And I'll post. I'm referencing a lot of stories throughout this, but I'll make a post in the Storycraft Cafe, and I'll link up all these. So if anyone wants to dig deep and read through these examples and kind of see what we're alluding to, you can. The ironic reversal, characters achieve the opposite of what they intended, often focuses on cosmic irony or the futility of human plans. An example is Kate Chopin's The Story of an Hour, where freedom is gained and lost in the space of an hour. That's a fun story, by the way. Twist pitfalls to avoid. The cheat twist relies on information the reader couldn't possibly have known, makes readers feel tricked rather than surprised. The solution to that is to plant subtle clues that readers can recognize in retrospect. It goes back to what we talked about earlier. Avoid the Deus Ex Machina, where the God in the machine comes down and just fixes everything. You want to avoid that. That should never be the solution. You should always give the reader the satisfaction of knowing they could have figured it out if they would have just worked a little harder. That's what we all want. The telegraph twist signals the ending too clearly, making it obvious and predictable, robs the story of its impact. One solution that is use misdirection and balance between subtlety and clarity. Find ways to make the reader look over here when you're actually showing them your hand over here. They just don't know that you are. The gimmick twist prioritizes shock value over meaningful revelation. Don't connect the story's themes. That it doesn't connect the story's themes or character development. Solution that is ensure the twist reveals something meaningful about the story's deeper concerns. Don't go for the cheap, twist. Make it meaningful throughout the story you're telling. The disconnected twist feels tacked on rather than integral to the story. Doesn't arise organically from what came before. A solution is the twist should feel like the culmination of the story, not an addition to it. What you don't want to do is write a story and think this is missing something. Let me just tack on a twist at the end. No, it needs to be woven through the story. Even if it comes at the end of your writing, you have the idea, oh, I could add a twist that would make it better. Go back through and onion it again and make sure you're weaving in. It's not just the ending where the ending comes from. The ending comes from the beginning and should be woven all the way through, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. In short stories, every word must contribute to your singular effect. Unlike novels, which can meander and explore, short stories demand precision and focus. Your challenge between now and next week is to take the story seed you just developed and expand it into a brief concept outline using the tentpole structure we discussed. Remember Ray Bradbury's advice about quantity leading to quality. Don't overthink the first draft. Capture that white heat Joyce Carol Oates mentioned. Write from instinct and heart. We'll work on the refinement later. Next week, we'll dive deeper into crafting compelling openings that hook readers immediately and discuss techniques for building powerful scenes within the constraint of short fiction. Are we all ready?
Oh, I'm ready. I'm pumped. So the homework is read those short stories, The Lottery and The Gift of the Magi and whatever else you post in the cafe. Yes. And then come up with the 5 holes of our tent that will
come up with your tent poles. Next week we're gonna talk about the characters we've developed, some general plot that we're thinking of for these characters and how we plan to carry that plot through. I don't want to talk too much about specifics of our endings because I want those to be organic and to leave the element of surprise for that. But we will talk about things we could do with those. So I don't want anyone to give away their ending if they don't want to.
I was fully prepared to give away mine.
Well, if you want to, then go nuts. But
Well, I think sometimes that's part of understanding the creative process too, is seeing how other people work like that. I know. So the short story that I read from that middle grade anthology, the one that just like made me lose my mind. It was one of those telegraphed twists. I think that's what that one fell under, where the beginning, it was so obvious, I think, even to a kid, what the ending was going to be. And then when the ending came, it broke to me it was one of the cardinal sins of MG writing, which is it delivered this really adult heavy message for kids that I absolutely cannot stand when that happens. Kids don't like that.
You know, the meme, and I think it's a still from a movie. I just can't remember what the movie is, with Steve Buscemi, where he's at high school and he's got like
what's up, fellow youth?
Hello, fellow youth, and he's obviously like a 40-year-old guy. You know,
that's what this
gives that
read like, and I was like, ew. Like, I mean, even as like a 46-year-old woman, I read it and I was like, ew, that's like, ew. And so I was put off by it. I felt like I was getting slapped with the same message. And I was like, this is bad. This is just bad. But I do feel better about the horror component after reading some of these, because I did not know how horror worked for middle grade. And now I think I get it a little better. I don't know if mine is necessarily going to be horror. Yeah. Is low horror a thing? Is cozy horror a thing, Doug? I feel like that's an oxymoron.
That does feel like an oxymoron.
It does, doesn't
it?
I
feel like cozy is infiltrating all genres here lately. I
mean, I'm in for it in a way. But
yeah, I mean, I no judgment. I'm just,
but it's a short story, so I'm going to try it out. If it doesn't work, I'm like, whatever. It was 7,000 words.
What you wasted 7,000 words? Who cares?
Big deal.
That's a Tuesday.
That's like 2 sprints for Doug. So
it's too much pressure being piled on now. Watch as I'm writing this 200 words per sprint, just plummeting in my productivity because of this.
I'm loving watching him sweat as we're like.
I'm feeling good. I'm feeling confident. And after
a cozy psychopath. I feel like this is my new challenge. Everybody come follow
Jane
Abby
wins comment of the day. Cozy.
Writes the cozy psychopath.
But I'm feeling good about this. I'm feeling confident. I like what story idea I have in my head. And in the vein of breaking Hank's rules, I actually already wrote the last like 50 words of the story because I just knew them. I knew exactly what I want. So
okay, that's actually amazing, Doug, because if you know your ending and you have your emotional resonance in mind already, that helps you. Okay, when you're writing your opening, what is going to serve that ending? You know, knowing the ending from the beginning or the beginning from the ending, or it's all circular, helps to know what. If you know the ending, you know the beginning has to serve that ending because we're approaching this in a circular fashion. So yeah, that's actually amazing.
Oh, look, Robert came up with his ending during the chat here. Yay!
All right. Anything else before we sign off?
Yeah, come back next week and we're gonna dig into we're gonna get our hands dirty with some words next week and put some of this into practice.
Yeah. And before next week, we do have writing sprints tomorrow at 12:30 p.m. Eastern, as we do from Tuesday to Thursday.
Wait, we? Let me check Slack. Maybe Robert can put it in the chat.
You know what? Someone will be here. Someone. There's calendar stuff going on, but we also have a couple things going on Friday, right? You two?
Yes, Friday. I am teaching a query letter class. I did my own version of editing. We've got, I think, maybe 8 query letters that we're going to go over, and we're going to look at some of them have a couple of iterations, and we're going to show you kind of why and what writing sprints are on. All right. So writing sprints tomorrow, agent queries. If you're interested in that, we're going to show you some real world examples and edit them. I say live. I did give them a good pass ahead of time to make sure that, you know,
you're gonna go through the edits
we had
live.
some solid. So you're going to go through the edits live. That's on Friday. So,
and then after Abby does that, I have an interview with James J. Butcher.
is that his son, Jim Butcher's son?
That's Old Man Butcher's boy. Yeah,
Yeah,
he's
Butcher's
to borrow a Southern phrase. That's Old Man Butcher's boy. You know him. Yeah, that's Jim Butcher's son, James J. Butcher, and his new book, Cold Iron Task. Is this book 3 of? I think it's book 3 in this series. Could be book 2, but I think it's book 3. Anyway, he's also writing urban fantasy, just like his dad. There's a lot of similarities. If you like Jim Butcher's writing, you'll like this. But you know, lots of questions to ask old James. So it should be a fun conversation.
Young
Friday.
James.
Yep, young James.
I'm excited for both shows. So
yeah, be a fun day on Friday.
A lot happening over here.
Well, thanks for joining us, everybody. I hope that over this month, you add some new tools to your writer toolkit, and that writing short stories, even if it's just for your own benefit and edification, hopefully this gives you a new path to publish. But even if it's just to hone your skills that then help you in novel writing, all of that is valid. And we just hope to help you add to that writer toolkit like we talked about. So thanks for joining us, everybody.